It's been a while since I have reviewed a standalone hi-fi DAC, and I had kind of lost interest in them because it felt like DAC technology development was maybe just incremental in recent years. But there's definitely been some DACs that have really stood out to me and got me excited to want to test them again. And one of them is the HiFi Rose RD160. And it's had me questioning that surely a DAC that was released at the end of 2024 has to be considerably better than a DAC that I've been using since early 2020. And that whole situation's very interesting, but far from clear cut. The RD160 is HiFi Rose's first standalone DAC, and it's very much intended to be a high-end unit with a price tag of £4,699, which is a lot of money, so my expectations are naturally high. But it does feel and look like a high-end unit, one where HiFi Rose have not held anything back. But in saying that, it doesn't have a streamer built in, and it doesn't have a headphone amplifier built in, it's just a DAC. Yay, that's great for somebody like me. But it does have a variable volume output or a volume control, so it can be a preamplifier for you too. And I'll give it a pass on that one because it's actually very good at doing that, or that feature is very useful. When I took it out of the box and held it in my hands, I was really very impressed, not only with the styling, but with the fit and finish. It's just a lovely, sturdily, very well built hi-fi product. And it has one of the nicest looking volume control wheels that I have seen, full stop. And it's especially good for a DAC. And I like the whole front design with the nice looking buttons. It's just super modern, very elegant, as is the top and the sides. And it will no doubt give you an immense sense of pride of ownership. It also has an invisible AM OLED screen that shines through the front faceplate in a totally unique way that I've never seen anything like before. The screen is surprisingly clear considering you can't tell there is a screen there when it's not turned on. It's extremely clever. The screen takes on two forms that you can select between. One has a larger, more obvious volume, which is better for viewing at a distance. And the other is more of a technical screen maybe, but both show you essentially the same information, so it's whichever floats your boat. There is a very nice quality remote control included that you need to use, as this is not a touchscreen device. I mean, there is no screen to touch. And the remote gets you into the DAC's menu system where you have the options to fix the output voltage between 9 different levels. And this is a great setup option, allowing you to be exact with the output voltage. And I know some audiophiles will love that. Another useful menu option is for how you want the DAC to behave visually. Do you want the screen to go away after a short period of time, or do you want to see the DAC's party trick, which is a cool waveform modern VU meter type of animation that matches up perfectly to the music? This is undoubtedly a super cool feature for a DAC, and you can see it obviously going there on the DAC behind me. But it did feel like a party trick to me, because after a couple of days I did turn it off. But it's cool, it's quirky, it's very much HiFi Rose. They always seem to find a way to make their hi-fi products just that little bit different, little bit unique, and stand out. Turning the DAC around, you can see there are many digital inputs to fit all systems, including both a single-ended and BNC coax input. It's great to get both. And an I2S input, but most interesting for me is the SFP audio input, which is a variant of USB, I believe. And if you also have a HiFi Rose streamer, such as the RS130 that I have here too, Rose sells a kit where you can connect from the streamer to the DAC using SFP with a fiber optic connection, with the benefit being it offers full isolation between the source and the DAC, as electrical noise cannot travel along with light pulses. Or at least that is my best understanding of why this technology has been implemented here. And we have seen this technology come into the hi-fi market for networking purposes and networking uses. And the RS130 that you can see just down there on the rack behind me, that has an SFP input for networking. But this is the first time I've seen it on a DAC for sending that type of digital audio signal instead of USB or SPDIF or I2S. But the big question is it worth it? Does it sound better? And I will answer that question shortly. For analog outputs, there are both single-ended and balanced. There are options to use an external clock if you want to, which some will love. So like I said, it's like Rose have not held anything back here, and the build quality of everything really is exceptional. But what about the internals? Removing the lid was no easy task because it's so thick and heavy, much thicker than I expected. And I assume this is acting as some kind of shield because it's exceptionally thick and again heavy. The first thing you see is the triple transformers showing 3 separate linear power supplies that are independent. One is for the digital inputs, and one is for the DAC's left channel, and the other the DAC's right channel. Very nice. The design seems pretty complex to me. It's fully balanced and symmetrical. It's using an AKM AK4191 chip for the initial digital filtering and conversion, and then the signal is sent to a second AKM DAC chip, the AK4499EX, for the final digital to analog conversion. Then out via JFET dual op amps using what Rose call lavish OCC copper cable. The internal clocking is using what Rose call a high precision OCXO clock. And there are an impressive amount of capacitors here and lots more. Clearly, there is a lot that is going on inside this DAC, and it's very impressive to my non-engineer eyes, but I'm unable to do a deep technical analysis of the DAC, and I know some people enjoy that and appreciate that as part of a review. So instead, what I did was a lot of listening, a lot of comparison listening in my fully acoustically treated listening room as part of a very high-end system. Let me tell you now, there are some standout things about this HiFi Rose DAC. Before I talk about sound quality, just want to say if you're enjoying this review, hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel to see more. Now, for the sound quality of the Rose DAC, I have to say I found that the connection that I was using from the Rose streamer to the Rose DAC ended up being more important than I originally realized. And I found it more impactful on the overall sound quality in the end than engaging any of the different upsampling options that are built in. Because you can upsample the music if you want to here, and that includes upsampling to DSD. I know some people like to do that. There are also 5 different DAC filter modes to choose between, and these do make some difference to the sound, but none of them stood out to me as being better than the stock setting of short sharp. I figured it has a little star by it for a reason. So for me, the biggest difference maker in the end came down to, as I said, the connection that I was using, whether I was using USB or SFP. And the story here is really simple. The SFP connection sounded clearer. It sounded more relaxed. It also sounded better in terms of detail and resolution in the music. So it was clearly the better connection of the two. However, I found in this system, with how I have things set up, it also sounded a bit leaner. It sounded less kind of big and full compared to a USB connection. So clearly it was the better connection still, but there was some trade-off to it. And initially I did about a week's worth of listening using the RD160 as a DAC and preamplifier, which is a great way to get to know it. And I tested it with 3 different power amplifiers. And over the week, I found I generally preferred to use the USB connection because I found it easier to get a better balance of overall sound to be more to my preference. And I was getting some great results, and the RD160 sound reminded me of my time with Rose's flagship RA180 integrated amplifier. And if you're familiar with that amplifier, you will know it has some standout sonic attributes. It sounds very clean, very fast, with a very vibrant or energetic music delivery, especially in the higher regions or the height regions of the soundstage. And I'm sure the RD160 measures with a totally flat frequency response. I mean, it even says so on the HiFi Rose website. But listening to it, I perceived its sound character as being maybe a little bit smiley face. Let me explain that. So what I noticed was there was a lot of height or higher in the soundstage, or higher frequency in a way, energy or vibrancy, like the height information, the highs information is very, very present, very clear. It's very stand out. And then at the opposite end of the sound, the bass, like the foundation bass, not mid bass, foundation deep bass, was very solid, very powerful, very impactful. And of course, I can't help but like that. So we had really great bass, and then a lot of high frequency energy, which helps the music sound fast, sound clear, and actually sound spacious. And that was combined with what I think is a slightly cooler than neutral mid-range region. What I mean by that is the DAC sounds very open, very clear, like there's nothing thick or congested in the middle region. You can very much see through the speakers onto the music. So it's a very open sound, would be how some audiophiles mention that. But it did mean that I was thinking about the balance of the sound. With the amplifier that I was using, I was trying to add maybe more tone with the amplifier and a more full and solid sound. Because it was easy to balance the sound very much the other way using an amplifier like the Eversolo F10, which is a very warm, quite a bold, and actually quite a dark, sweet sounding amplifier. And it made for a very nicely warm, quite dark actually, overall sound that was very lovely, very warm, very pleasing, and very bass bold. I really liked that sound. It's very pleasing. And it showed to me that despite how vibrant the RD160's highs can sound, they're also really quite delicate. And I actually found myself missing that part of the presentation. The upper frequency, the high vibrancy was missing for me. So switching to a better, more transparent power amplifier like the Esoteric SO3 showed to me better the spaciousness of sound the RD160 can deliver, and it added some sweetness to the vibrant highs and high frequency information, so we didn't lose them. It just added a little bit of sweetness to them, which I really enjoyed. In fact, this was a fantastic sounding overall system. It was clear, it was lively, it was dynamic, very vibrant, with just a touch of sweetness. What's interesting about this is if you're an audiophile who just streams digital music in one way or another, well then maybe you wouldn't need a preamplifier, because what's built into the RD160 is really very good. You have a good remote control, a good volume control. It's all very responsive, so that could potentially save you some money. And this was proved to me when I did a listening test or comparison, or when I added to the system HiFi Rose's flagship integrated amplifier, the RA180, because the preamplifier aspect, I didn't notice too much difference. I think I noticed more of a difference in the capability of the amplification of the integrated amplifier more than the preamplifier. So look, I'm not saying that adding a preamplifier to this stack wouldn't make it sound better. Of course, there'll be some that will, but I just feel like it's not necessarily essential, because the way it does it, the way it works, actually is really very good. And to me, that's very praiseworthy, but it's not the full picture, because after spending considerable time listening to a full HiFi Rose setup of the RS130 Streamer, RD160 DAC, and RA180 integrated amplifier, and that allowed me to test again USB versus FSP, and actually test it much more effectively. The SFP offered the same clearer, more relaxed and more detailed sound, and it was leaner, but I found that I could raise the output voltage of the RD160 to embolden and enrich the overall sound, more to my taste. So there was now no trade-off to using the SFP connection, which is happy days. And to try and explain the difference, because it's not like it's a night and day necessarily difference, or one destroys the other type of difference, but it is significant, it's very evident, and once you've heard it, you know, you can't unhear it. It's one of those types of differences. So let me try and explain. So imagine there's like a big crescendo peak in a classical piece of music. Sometimes that can sound like a big mass of energy or big mass of sound. And that is how I would describe the sound using the USB connection between the streamer and the DAC. However, when I used the SFP connection, that big mass of sound had detail, it had structure, it had like layering, it had information there. It wasn't just a big mass of sound. And I noticed the same kind of difference across everything in the mid-range and the high. So vocals were clearer, there was more, I think it's what some reviewers call inner detail. It's like the timing of the music, it's just that little bit better. And you can just hear more details in everything in the mid-range and vocals and everything in the high. So I say everything, just some more detail in the vocals and some more details in the highs. But the reason it's not a night and day difference is because I couldn't tell that much difference in the bass. But again, it's like once you've heard the clearer, more better timed FSP connection sound, when you go back to USB, at least with this setup, obviously, the sound was just a bit more mushy. So once you've heard it, like I say, you can't unhear it, but it's not, like I said, it's not night and day, but it is very clear and evident. But none of this tells us if the RD160 is a good DAC or not. I think the fact that I've been listening to it so much is very telling to me of how much I like it. But to know how good it is, we need to compare it to another. And for me, that means comparing it to the Chord Electronics Hugo TT2, a DAC that I've been using as my reference for around 5 years now. And I was able to set up a really nice test where I ran USB out of the Rose streamer to the Chord setup and SFP to the Rose DAC. And what that allowed me to do was keep both DACs on, keep them warm. I could just quickly turn the DAC off, quickly turn the amplifier off, change the balanced connections, change the output from the streamer. So I could swap between DACs in probably less than a minute or about a minute. So it was fairly quick to change from one to the other, but I didn't really need to. I did extensive listening, like hours and hours of listening between the two DACs, and the differences between them is really very interesting. Because straight away I found myself looking to match the TT2 sound to what the RD160 had been doing before it, which is an instant sign of the difference. And that meant I had to have the TT2 in amp mode, in high gain mode, and the volume set high. Otherwise the TT2 sounded lacking some in terms of delivering music with the same energy level. That was telling difference number one. Secondly, there was a big difference in, I'm going to use the word vibrancy. It's a word that's used on the Rose website. It's actually the perfect way to describe like the height sound, the higher frequency, higher information, the energy that lives in the higher up parts of the sound stage. The difference between the Rose and the TT2 in that regard was massive. And using tone controls, I could test this, and I would say it was at least a 2 dB difference in terms of the perception of sound, which would make you think that the Rose is like a brighter sounding DAC because it's like several dB perceived louder in the higher frequencies, and you just don't hear it like that. You just hear it as more lit up, more alive in like the higher frequencies of the soundstage. It's a very stark, very interesting difference. And it's great because it adds a sense of energy, it adds a sense of spaciousness, and maybe a little bit more of a live type of sound. But it definitely needs to be balanced. But this is where a DAC like the Chord TT2, I think, offers more useful different filter options that change the tonal balance of the sound. And I think that is far more useful than the different filters that are in the Rose. That said, comparing the two, even with the TT2 in its most analytical filter mode, it was definitely the drier sounding of the two DACs. The bass was similar between them for quality. The bass was a bit more full and a bit more rounded and a bit more punchy from the Rose, but I really like the bass articulation from the TT2. It really is a good DAC for bass quality, even if it's the more dry of the two. And the vocals of the TT2 are also drier. They're just, when I say drier, I mean they're just a bit more calm. They're a bit more sure-footed. I would say it's maybe a good thing because sometimes they sound a little bit more like vocals in a microphone in a studio vocal booth. Whereas I think that Rose is just a bit more exciting. It's a bit more energetic. And I have to say the vocals were clearer. They were more spacious, I think, and there was more in 3D space compared to the TT2. So that was another considerable telling difference. So the long and short here is I really enjoyed listening to music with the TT2 DAC, but I enjoyed listening to the same music through the RD160 more. It just has more going on that I missed when it was taken away. But we do have to factor in the price difference. The TT2 costs about £1,000 less. However, many TT2 owners will already have an M Scaler, as do I. So I tested the TT2 and M Scaler versus the Rose, and now the differences between them was much closer. They sounded quite similar to me. But with the major differences still being that the Rose has that extra height information or vibrancy to its height sound or higher frequencies, and the TT2 doesn't give you that. It still has that more dry and rounded sound for good or for bad, depending on how you see it. Most importantly, the Rose DAC still had the advantage of that extra resolution and clarity of the sound thanks to the SFP connection. I could still hear that same difference coming through. So if you're a HiFi Rose server owner and it has an SFP connection, it means the RD160 is going to be a very compelling DAC choice for you because it offers you something that maybe other DAC manufacturers can't better. Maybe they can or maybe they can't, but either way it makes the 160 a very compelling choice for you. But what's about everybody else? So I had to test USB to the Chord setup and USB to the Rose setup. And in that situation, they was pretty much toe-to-toe with each other, with their differences being just the presentation differences. The Chord's a bit drier, the Rose is a bit more lit up, a bit more vibrant, maybe a little bit more exciting as opposed to dry. So you could say the Rose is doing things different. It's doing things better for less money. You could say that. So in summary then, the RD160 proves that the DAC game has been moving forward in the last 5 years. Even if not by miracle amounts, there is evidence of clear progress here, including other important technology developments that can give us better sound quality, such as a connection technology. And I suppose that could be the main negative of the RD160 DAC. It's very standout presentation. Maybe it might not be for everybody. If your system's already very bright and you're hoping a DAC can maybe soften the sound a little bit and make it more kind of dark or more sultry, this probably wouldn't be the right choice for you. Maybe a certain type of R2R DAC would do that better. If you're looking for like a very thick, dense kind of tonal sound from a DAC, then this isn't really going to do that. This is a bit more about liveliness and energy. But like I said, it's not so much that way. You can't balance it. I balanced it all the way the other way with just one amplifier choice. So like they're very key standout things with this DAC, the vibrancy, the energy, but it's easy to lose them. And it's interesting when you talk about like vibrancy or maybe like a brighter sound to an audiophile, because the word bright, makes audiophiles quake in their boots. But like not all bright is bad. This DAC proves that like a little bit brighter, a little bit more lit up can actually be a very good thing that you miss when it's taken away. And I actually think the RD160 is an excellent DAC. I've really enjoyed my time with it. Yeah, it's got a little bit quirky in ways, but that is obviously the HiFi Rose way. And it's lovely. It's a lovely thing. It makes for a very compelling choice at its price, and it could be a no-brainer for you if you're a HiFi Rose music streamer or server owner already. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope you found it useful and helpful. If you have, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel for more.